5 candles. 5 people. A box of matches or lighter for each, 1 hour. It's all you need to play the midnight game. In this game, you play with one goal in mind. Don't wake them up. Who's they, you ask? They're what lies beneath. The rules are simple. Don't make a sound. Don't leave the play area. Don't let your candle go out. And don't get scared so badly you scream. If all these rules are broken, you lose. And they win. Now listen carefully and let me tell you what happened when I played the midnight game. Our play area was an old abandoned asylum known as Hammond's Ward. I played the midnight game with my friends, Carlton, Josie, Greg, and Benny. Benny was the one who learned about the midnight game. He was an amateur occultist during his emo phase, so he learned of this particular urban legend. He had to play for himself, only he needed 4 others to play, naturally. His friends were the first choice. 5 12-year-olds playing some kind of occult ritual. What could go wrong? I thought it was a joke when he asked me to play with him. I mean, when he insisted, I went along. Solely because I thought this would be rather amusing. I tried Bloody Mary with Benny once. Nothing happened. We'd gone to haunted houses looking for ghosts. Nothing happened. Benny was still convinced the supernatural was real, despite all his ventures turning up nothing. This time would be no different. I told him as much. How wrong I was. Benny explained the midnight game to us when we reached the asylum. It was a little-known urban legend that went as follows. Supposedly there are things that lie beneath our notice, and they can only be contacted through a specific ritual, the midnight game. In this game, 5 people with 5 candles would sit in a circle, 1 candle for each. If the candle went out, it had to be relit as soon as possible. At some point, they could leave the circle, but not the designated play area. Another specific was that the midnight game had to be played in an area that had seen great suffering. Benny didn't need to explain that, as an asylum had a history all of its own. Sexual abuse of patients, multiple suicides, lobotomies. It had it all. Benny had even taken me here once, trying to find ghosts. We didn't. The asylum is an eerie place, nonetheless. Spray paint on the walls, often of upside-down crosses, pentagrams. The empty bottles made me realize we weren't the first people here. I wondered if anyone would come back. The place doesn't need ghosts to be horrific. Sometimes people are all there is needed. There was one last rule to the midnight game that Benny told us. Don't say a word. We can't speak for the full hour. We need a timer of some kind to ensure that the hour passed, so Greg set the timer on his phone. Benny took us to one of the cells, and that was where we played the midnight game. I asked him why this cell. He said that door was the best. I asked him where he'd found this. And when he said that it was some internet forum, I rolled my eyes. And I was about ready to leave. I only stayed because my other friends did, and I didn't want to look like a pussy in front of them, especially Josie. We sat in a circle and we passed around the candles. No 2 were identical. Mine was long, thin, and red. Josie's was orange and plump. Benny's was a black cylinder. Greg was a yellow stick. Carlton had a green stick. Benny explained one last thing before we started. We have to light our candles clockwise, he said. And in the last minute before midnight. What time is it? Greg pulled out his phone. 11:58. No, 59. Just changed. Benny breathed a sigh of relief and then lit his candle first. 1 hour. 1 hour of your time, that's all we ask. I went next. Then Josie. Then Greg. Then Carlton, who rolled his eyes. Once we'd lit our candles, Benny held out his hand. We hold our hands, he said, to show that we're united in this. I felt goofy taking his hand, but it was nice to have Josie holding mine. Once Carlton had grumbled and grabbed Benny's hand, he continued. We all 5 seeking to play with you, he continued. 5 people with 5 candles. We seek to play the midnight game with you. Do you seek to play the midnight game with us? Silence. Absolute silence. That was what answered Benny. I opened my mouth to say this was stupid when I realized how quiet it was. I took in a breath and felt the air go down my throat, but didn't hear a thing. I tapped my foot against the floor gently. Not a sound. In the pit of my stomach, dread crept in. I looked over to Benny, alarmed, but he seemed entranced by the flame of his candle. "If you wish to play," he said, "give us a sign." His voice penetrated the silence, the only sound any of us could hear. I looked over at Josie. She moved her mouth as if she was saying something, but nothing was coming out. I glanced over at Carlton and Greg, who had expressions that mirrored both Josie's and my own. "Give us a sign," Benny said, suddenly like he was demanding them to obey him, but not with any genuine force. He was desperate, hoping beyond hope that this would work, that his interest in the occult and the supernatural wasn't pointless, that he would be able to show his face to his friends again. I could guess that was what was going through his head at the moment. Nothing happened. We waited, breath held, wondering what we'd gotten ourselves into, but nothing happened. Benny sighed and opened his mouth to speak. I could see in his eyes the disappointment that this hadn't worked. Did he notice how quiet it was? The black cylinder in front of Benny was blown out by a gust of air. Benny froze, staring at the smoke rising from the burnt wick, then quickly pulled out a match and struck it and relit the candle. He smiled and turned to us. The disappointment was gone, replaced by an excited glee. I don't think he realized the severity of what was going on. "The game is on," he said. "It will begin in 3, 2, 1. All our candles went out instantly. In a panic to relight them, I didn't notice that the silence was gone. It was only after I stared at my long, thin candle, the red wax melting from the wick, that I realized I could hear the others breathing. I looked up and stared at my friends, one by one. They were all as bewildered as I was, save Benny. I wanted to speak, to say something, but Benny had said that we couldn't speak for the full hour. After what had happened, did I want to risk something going wrong? The silence was broken by a voice, but it wasn't one of us. "What have we here?" it said, as soft as a child's. "Players," said another voice, identical to the first. "Players for the midnight game. It's been so long since we've seen players for the midnight game." "What joy! What joy!" said a third voice. "What joy! What joy! It's been so long since I've played the midnight game." "I've never played," said a fourth voice. "What do we do?" "Come," said the fifth voice. "Let me show you." I didn't even breathe, wondering if I had imagined the voices. I glanced up at Benny, whose eyes were wide with excitement and shock. "What the fuck, man?" Carlton said, breaking the silence. "Fuck this, I'm leaving." He grunted, and as I stared at him, I watched dumbfounded at how much he seemed to be trying to push himself off the ground. I couldn't help but notice the indents forming on the shoulders of his coat, like fingers as thin as pencils. What the fuck?" Carlton spoke softly, his voice quivering. I couldn't help looking around the filthy room. Each one of my friends had eyes wide as mine. Benny was glancing behind him at nothing, so it seemed. I wanted to ask him what he was doing, but then my candle went out. I hastily struck a match and lit the candle before turning back to Benny. He wasn't staring at the wall anymore. He was looking directly at his candle, face pale. Briefly, his wet eyes glanced up and met mine. He didn't need to say a thing to convey his regret, one that I shared. There was a squeaking sound from outside, and we all glanced at the door. It was a sharp, painful, metallic, slow squeaking. It seemed to stretch throughout the asylum. It got closer and closer with each second. In anticipation, we waited for whatever horror would pass by the door. An empty, rusty wheelchair came into view, on the other side of the door frame before it came to a stop. Slowly turning its crooked wheels, it faced us. The left front wheel lurched forward into the room suddenly, and then the right one. It lurched slowly, wheel by wheel, into the room until it passed the door and then stopped. "The hell?" Carlton said, the indents on his shoulders tightening. "Shh," said the fifth voice suddenly. "Shush. You don't want to wake them up, do you?" That phrase sunk in slowly. Wake them up. Them. They hadn't woken up yet. The fifth voice continued to speak. They aren't awake yet, it said. If they awake, you will all lose. Now pick up your candles, get to your feet. It's time to play the midnight game. You know the goal, don't you? Don't wake them up. There was a pause before he continued to speak. As it did, I couldn't help noticing the way that the indents on Carlton's shoulders tightened. If they wake up, we win. I glanced at each of my friends in turn before turning back to Carlton. The fifth voice spoke again. This one's already spoken. They're stirring now, but not yet awake. It's only fair if none of you speak for the rest of the game, is it not? Yes, but can you stop yourselves from screaming? Carlton didn't. He reached up an arm as he was suddenly yanked back into the darkness and vanished. I was about to cry out, but Benny held up a hand, and the other candle held high as he pointed at the darkness. Carlton was back. His face was long and gaunt, his hair white, his eyes wide, his entire body shaking. He opened his mouth and nothing came out. One player, the fifth voice said, has lost the midnight game. There was a soft giggle from the other four voices. Then all five spoke together. 1 down, 4 left. I've heard it said the oldest and strangest human emotion is fear. And the oldest and strongest fear is the fear of the unknown. Speaking from my time playing the midnight game, I can safely say this is true. None of us knew what had happened to Carlton, nor did we want to know. Just looking at his gaunt face was enough to send a chill down my spine. And the voices were still speaking in unison. 1 down, 4 left. 1 down, 4 left. 1 down, 4 left. They were chanting it over and over. I put my hand over my ears, trying to blot it out. And then my candle went out. I immediately tried to relight it, and I felt a hand touch my arm. I glanced up instantly to find myself looking into Josie's face. It was covered in panic as she pointed at the door. I only just struck the match when something moaned. It wasn't one of the voices. It was human. The deep, guttural, feral groan of a man. The voices ceased chanting. Interesting, said the fifth voice. It would appear someone else is here, not a player of the midnight game. There were a few seconds of silence, a clink of glass from the door. Benny, Greg, Josie, and I all looked at it. An empty bottle was rising slowly into the air, suspended by invisible hands that left pencil-thin markings in the dust. Run! It was the fifth voice. And then the bottle lurched up into the air before violently dropping onto the floor. It shattered, glass sparkling in the moonlight. A feral scream followed instantly. I barely remembered grabbing my candle and booking it out of there. Josie was the first to the door, and I trailed behind her. We both jointedly pushed the wheelchair out of the way, and it landed on its side with a loud crash as part of it cracked. The glass shards cracked under my shoes and that of my friends. Heavy footsteps were thundering down the hallway towards us, while a horrific screaming accompanied it. I struggled not to yell and scream in panic. Somehow none of my friends did either. Josie and Greg were sprinting down the hall in front of me, not daring to look back. I wanted to call out and beg them to wait up, but the heavy breathing next to my ear made me pause. I glanced over my shoulder to find Carlton's gaunt, pale face following me. His white hair contrasted against the darkness around us. A blank look was on his face, and his unlit candle was clasped in front of his chest. He pushed past me without a glance, slamming like against the wall as he seemed to glide down the hallway. My candle fell onto the ground, flame going out. I bent down to pick it up and relit it, then heard something else fall into the ground. Benny groaned in pain. I looked over and my heart dropped. Benny had tripped over and upended the wheelchair, dropping his candle, smoke drifting from the burnt lit wick. Benny's hands gritted against the broken glass as he lifted one up and reached for the black candle. Shards of glass were stuck in his palm, blood trailing down it. He grabbed the candle and Benny began to get to his feet. The thundering footsteps were almost on top of us. I was already rushing back to help Benny onto his feet when the candle suddenly lurched out of his hand, spinning across the ground. And then it stopped. slowly lifted into the air. When it flew into a curve through the air, Benny was already on his feet and caught it, already trying to strike a match. I stared with wide eyes as the footsteps began to round the corner at the very end of the hallway. "No," said one of the voices. "No, he's not supposed to." "Rules," said the fifth voice, "are to be followed, not bent." "But how can we win?" "Not by resorting to cheating," the fifth voice hissed back. "Now, players, do as I told you. Run!" In the moonlight at the end of the hallway, a massive, towering figure lurched into view. Head a bush of hair. The feral screams became the howl of an animal. I raced forward, grabbing Benny by the arm and began dragging him forward. He shook me off and then fell into step beside me, behind us. The howling was getting closer. The hallway split into 3 different directions at an intersection, not including the one we were already in. I glanced at Benny and pointed my finger to the right, then at him, still running. We were so close, Benny didn't need to be told twice what to do. The instant we reached the intersection, he took the right, and I turned to follow him. I slipped on a bottle, almost falling to the ground before I could steady myself. Benny paused, watching me with wide eyes, and turned, about to help me when I held up a free hand. The howling was almost on top of us. Without thinking, I began running in the opposite direction. I looked back to see Benny watching me go with a panicked expression before he ran to the other direction. Then his form was obscured by a lurking, hulking figure that howled at me. He chased me through the asylum, relentless in his pursuit. I don't know how I managed to evade him, ducking under broken doors that hung out from their frames limply. I swear I could feel his hot breath on the back of my neck. But he never managed to grab me. I knew that if his hands wrapped around my neck, I'd be done for. After I took another corner, then ducked into an abandoned room, his screams grew distant. I kept running, ignoring the way my lungs screamed in protest as I tried to find somewhere to hide. I stopped and I pushed through a set of double doors and found myself in what must have been a kitchen. Old pots and pans littered the floor, along with knives that were covered with dark rust, spatulas, large serving spoons, and other cooking utensils that I couldn't name for the life of me. I began frantically looking around, trying to figure out where to hide. I opened one of the old fridges, then gagged at what I saw inside. It was the remains of a rat covered in fat, wriggling maggots. I slammed the door shut on instinct. There was a grunt from the distance just outside the double doors, and then heavy footsteps. I scolded myself for having been so stupid. The heavy footsteps were getting closer, accompanied by grunting and deranged mumbles. I looked around. I ran to one of the cupboards, opened it, and shoved myself inside. The candle was my only illumination. As the footsteps got closer, I glanced down at the edge of the cupboard doors. Opened just a crack so I could breathe. Light from the candle was spilling out of it. Without thinking, I blew out my candle, and I hunched into the cupboard, already digging into my pocket for the matches. Then the doors burst open and I froze. I could hear the deep guttural voice of the crazy man speaking incoherently. The footsteps that plodded through the kitchen kicked aside anything in their path. A clatter of rust as something was broken apart, the slamming of a door. Discomfort crept into my body as I crouched inside the cupboard, my back arched. The footsteps continued to creep through the kitchen. Glass crunched close to me, and I cupped a hand over my mouth to stifle my gasps. Smoke drifted upward from my long, thin candle in my other hand. The footsteps came to stop directly in front of me, and a shadow was sitting in front of the cupboard door. The intelligible mumbling from directly in front of me, it carried a distinct tone of menace to it. Unhinged, I should say. When something shuffled, the shadow moved, and then under the crack, I could see the bare, filthy feet of a man with yellow, fungus-infected toenails. And the other foot came into view, and both feet turned, coming to a stop directly in front of my cupboard. The mumbling was replaced by a long, deep sniff. And then something banged on the top of the cupboard. I bit my tongue so hard it began to bleed. Another bang above me, then several more poundings. The man was battering down, howling with rage. Tears began to roll down my face. I was gonna die here. And then the battering stopped, as did the howling. I listened closely as I heard a metallic squeak, followed by a door slamming shut. The feet with yellow claw-like toenails shuffled away. I waited until I heard them growing faint, the intelligible mumbling fading with them. I pulled up my matches, lit one, and held my candle steady as I put the flame back to the wick. I breathed a sigh of relief when a burning flame was now on top of it, and I blew out the match. Then slowly the cupboard door opened, coming to a stop when it was halfway from me. Dust on the inside of the door had been disturbed, leaving pencil-thin marks where the dust had been swept away. I waited with bated breath. The door shot forward and I winced. It didn't slam shut, however. It stopped just before it shut completely, an inch from the cabinet. I jumped and I dropped my candle when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I instantly grabbed my candle before the flame could go out, holding it close to my face as I pulled up my phone. It was a text from Josie. My friends and I had set up a group chat for easy contact. I wasn't relieved to see Josie's message, however. What she had sent me made my blood run cold. Guys, I'm in the basement and I think I can hear something. I was the first to send a message back. Josie, get out of the basement now. I watched as the 3 small dots appeared in a text box before her reply came through. I can't. There's something upstairs, blocking the door. I can hear one of the voices, whispering from the top. I think it's singing. I gulped when I saw another message, this time unmistakably from Benny. Josie, I'll try my best to help you. Greg, Larry, are you guys with Carlton? Greg answered first. I thought he was with one of you guys. My heart skipped to my chest and grimly sent another message. Guys, Carlton isn't with me. There wasn't any text boxes with small dots for a few seconds as that settled in. Just when I saw Benny begin to type, it happened. There was a sharp scraping sound like stones were being dragged along the metallic ground. The asylum began to shake and lurch, not like an earthquake was happening beneath our feet. This was different. It was like the asylum was moving. A voice spoke right next to my ear. They're stirring. Then Josie sent another message. Guys, something's wrong down here. Something really wrong. I'm not alone. I'm scared. I can hear something screaming. I don't think it's human. Damn it, Benny. Why'd you convince us to play this game? Benny was just beginning to answer when the shaking stopped. Outside the cupboard, a dull green light was oozing into the crack. My phone buzzed and I checked the new message. It was Greg. Guys, he began. I'm looking out the window and I don't think we're on Earth anymore. Not on Earth anymore. How in the hell could we not be on Earth anymore? I texted as much to Greg. His response chilled me to the bone. Guys, I can see outside. The green light, I think it's a star? Josie was the first to respond. Bullshit. This is bullshit. Damn it, Benny, you're an idiot. You didn't tell us this game would take us off our planet. I didn't know, Benny answered. I wanted to know if there was something out there. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Well, something is out there and it's toying with us. Are you happy, Benny? Greg's reply ended Benny and Josie's argument before I could. Guys, cool it. We have to figure out how to get out of here. Look, we have about an hour at least, but we need to find Carlton. Benny, is there anything else you can remember about the rules of the Midnight Game? I can't, guys. I'm so sorry. I went into this half prepared. I just read the basic rules. Something occurred to me as Josie began to type. I voiced it in the group chat. Hey, how are we still texting each other? Josie's text box vanished and was replaced with Greg's. I'm not so sure. Actually, somehow we still got a connection. You shouldn't take that for granted. If we lose this connection, we're screwed. We have to stay together. Josie, you said that you're in the basement, right? I'll try to get over there and help you. Benny, Larry, try to find Carlton. We'll meet in the cell this all started in, okay? What about the crazy guy? Someone had to say it. Might as well be me. I waited intently for a reply, the flickering flame of my candle keeping the green light from outside at bay. Greg was the only one to respond. I don't know, just try to avoid him. Everyone get the plan? A slew of texts in the affirmative followed. Okay. Good luck, guys. Stay safe. I waited a few minutes, but no new messages appeared in the group chat. That left me with one option. I had to get out of the cupboard. Carefully, I pushed open the door with my foot. The entire kitchen was bathed in the sickly green light from outside. I wasn't able to help myself, and I glanced out the window to the source. There, high above us in the dark sky, was a burning ball of gas. Gas the color of a corpse. The landscape was almost identical to the forest that we'd gone through and reached this asylum. The trees stood tall above the ground. Ferns, grass, and flowers dotted the fields, but it was gray, just barren and lifeless. Nothing moved. I had to stuff my phone in my pocket as I picked up a knife, if only to convince myself that I could fight back against whatever we were up against. The knife was coated with rust, and the handle had worn away, revealing the metal skeleton beneath. Parts of the blade had been chipped away, leaving it jagged and gnarled. I pushed open the doors of the kitchen slowly, imagining the hulking shape of a man waiting on the other side. His arms would shoot out, grab my neck, and... nothing. There was nothing. Just an empty hallway. Spray paint covering the walls while the sickly green sunlight poured in from outside. Where was he?
Be careful,
said a voice next to my ear.
There are worse things than people in this place.
Something brushed through my hair. It felt like a swarm of 5 thin, hard worms. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run and never stop running, but I couldn't bring myself to move an inch. Like I was a statue. I was rooted to the spot. A distant inhuman howl came down the hall that made me move. Melted wax dripped onto my skin. I didn't care. I walked slowly down the hallway, knife held in my shaking hand. Every step was made with a gentle touch in case I made the slightest noise. The only thing I could hear was my breathing, which echoed off the walls around me. I stopped, my mouth shut. The breathing didn't stop.
Fear,
said a voice. One of the 5 voices from the cell.
Fear. We are fear.
My candle went out. I dropped my knife, I struggled to relight it, and by the time I had, my heart was pounding in my chest. I just picked up my knife again, when there was an enormous crash from down the hall in front of me, followed by that inhuman howl. I remained frozen, looking at the end of the hallway. A massive window waited for me, the green light that passed through it, casting an ill haze. In the light, shadows seemed to converge together. A figure slowly appeared, undeniably human, but with pencil-thin fingers and elongated limbs. The head that formed was hideous in its outline, a caricature of a human face. I can make out fat lips that stuck out too far from the face, twisted teeth that stabbed through the gums, green, crooked eyes glared at me hatefully while strands of thin hair hung off a tumor-rotten head. The figure moved, then vanished. I gripped my candle tighter. Larry! I spun around to face behind me. Carlton. That was Carlton's voice. Larry. I spun around again, facing behind. That wasn't Carlton talking. I continued walking slowly, hand gripping the knife as I was assaulted by my friend's disembodied voice, repeating my name, always from a new location. In front of me one instant, behind me the next, above me, beneath me, inside me even. Larry. 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 I wanted to scream at it to go away, but I couldn't make a sound. I'd break the rules if I did. I just kept walking. I was mounting a set of stairs when a glass bottle covered in dust rolled across the top step and then gently began to descend the stairs. I was on the very middle step when it passed me, and I watched it. Something was in the dust. I bent down quickly and I grabbed the nose of the bottle, picking it up and holding it to my face. My name was written in the dust, but that wasn't all. Larry, it's behind you. I knew it was a lie. I dropped the bottle and I continued up the stairs. A window pane was waiting for me at the top. When I reached the last step, a small squeak made me freeze. I turned to the window. Dust and grime covered it like the bottle, and an invisible finger was slowly dragging a thin line down one side of it. When it stopped, another thin line stretched out from the bottom, eventually making a capital L. I watched as my name was written on the window, but that wasn't all. Larry, they are what lies beneath. Josie's going to wake them up, Larry. She's gonna scream. They will wake up. I turned away from the window and entered the third floor. I didn't know how I was going to find Carlton. I just thought that he might be up here. My phone buzzed. I quickly stuffed the knife into the crook of my arm, and I pulled it out. A text message from Benny. Guys, I found the door to the basement. There's 2 hospital beds stacked against it. I can't move them. I can't get Josie out. Don't make too much noise, I texted back. Otherwise that crazy man might hear you. And then someone screamed. I froze. Looking up at my phone, I knew that voice. My heart went cold when the screaming stopped. One single thought went through my head. They got Greg.
2 down.
Said a voice next to my ear.
3 left. Two down. 3 left.
The voice giggled.
You're going to lose the midnight game.
I ignored it. I pulled up my phone and I checked for any messages. Nothing. I frantically began typing a text when my candle went out. In my haste, I relit it. I once again had to drop my knife and stow away my phone. Candle relit. A sharp noise from behind me made me turn around. I'll never forget what I saw. It was Carlton. His face gaunt and pale, his eyes sunk deep into his face, his hair white, arms crossed over his body. I blinked in surprise and began running towards him, willing myself not to scream his name. Carlton remained stock still as I wrapped my arms around him, careful not to burn him with my candle. Then he spoke. I felt my blood run cold. It wasn't the voice of my friend since kindergarten. It was a hollow, distant, empty voice. Larry? No human being could have made it. There was no cadence to it at all. Larry? I let go of Carlton and I stepped back from him. Looking into his haunted eyes, I felt something stir within me, a pit of primal fear. Atavistic in its simplicity. Run, Carlton said. Run, Larry. He took a step forward. And I ran. I ran as fast as I could, not daring to stop for even a second. Like a rat between the walls, I turned each corner with complete carelessness. Spray-painted words of red, black, purple, and other colors passed me by. They spoke to me. They are what lies beneath. They stir. They're working. What happens when they wake? I'm sure it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I'm sure of it. Because I didn't dare try to consider the idea that it wasn't. By the time I'd stopped running, I was in a room with a rusty steel table, moldy curtains on a tray with twisted surgical instruments. An operating room. That's what this was. It was obvious at a glance. Something moved in the corner. My eyes snapped to it. He was a rat, a big black rat, with 2 dark eyes that stared into me. It sat on its hind legs, nose twitching, as its front paws were held out in front of it. It winked, then turned around and darted into the corner, literally. The pink tail slithered into the wall through a hole. My candle was still gripped in my hand. I tightened my grip, unwilling to take my eyes off the corner. The 5th voice spoke in my ear.
Ah,
it said.
How interesting. A rat that winks. Who do you think taught it to do that?
It paused. I felt something slightly touch my shoulder. A gust of warm air blew over my ear before it spoke again.
Do you think you could fit in the walls if you tried?
The rat appeared in the hole, head tilted impatiently. Its nose twitched, and then it suddenly sprang out, rushing across the floor towards me. I almost screamed when it reached my leg. Then it jumped into the air next to me and stopped in midair, claws latching onto something that I couldn't see as its teeth began furiously chewing.
Oh my,
said the fifth voice, amused.
It's got my leg.
Somehow I could feel its gaze focus on me.
Are you gonna turn down a gift horse?
I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, shuffling, patient steps, and a dry, empty husk of a voice saying my name, getting closer. Carlton had found me. He never lost me. Hattie? I took my chance. I ran towards the corner. I knew that I wouldn't be able to fit through the rat hole, but somehow a part of me that hadn't been used for generations since the days of cavemen knew that I had to get into the wall. I began kicking at it, imagining that it would take a good few kicks to knock it down. It fell apart on the first kick. There was a squeak from behind me, and I didn't get the chance to turn around before the rat rushed past my leg and through the widened hole. I followed instantly. The space between the walls was cramped, yet wide enough for me to walk through. My candle guided my every step, keeping the rat in view the whole time. When it turned a corner, I followed. I didn't think until later about why Hammond Asylum had walls large enough to accommodate a person, let alone someone my age. When my phone buzzed, the rat stopped and turned around, looking right at me. I paused. The rat seemed annoyed at this as it squeaked, nodding its head. I took the hint and I pulled out my phone. It was a message from Benny. Guys, I got Josie out of the basement. We're heading to the front entrance. I can't find Greg or Carlton. What about you, Larry? I began to reply when Benny started another message. Wait, I can see Greg. He's in the west wing. My eyes widened. I immediately changed my message. Benny, don't go near Greg. Don't go near Carlton. Find somewhere to hide and I'll come get you. Josie replied to me before Benny could. Larry, what are you talking about? I began typing when I heard a scream. It wasn't Benny. It wasn't Josie. It was an inhuman, howling scream from directly beneath me. The rat squealed again, agitated from beneath me. I heard footsteps pounding across the floor. From behind me came a slow, distant voice. Larry? I looked at the rat and stuffed my phone away. I was about to get the knife when I realized something. I'd lost the knife, hadn't I? The voice spoke again, coming closer. Larry, I'm coming. The rat turned away and began running. I followed it. I kept following it until a hole opened up in the floor. It seemed to swarm and convulse like a mouth opening to reveal the darkness beneath. The rat went first and I followed. I didn't think I just jumped. A sharp pain racing through my legs when I hit the ground and hissed through the gritted teeth. Then I took in my surroundings. Rats. More big, black rats, all staring right at me. There was a rush as some of them swarmed upwards, and the hole closed. The rest regarded me with a suspicious glare, almost like they were accusing me of something. I held my candle as I slowly turned around, seeing the entire room was covered by rats. Far more rats I had ever seen or would see again. In the candlelight, their incisors gleamed when a few opened their mouths. One of the rats crawled forward. I paused, looking down at the rat as it stood on its hind legs. It winked at me, then turned around. It chirped. The other rat skittered away, revealing a door. On the other side, I could see the hallway illuminated by the green sunlight. The rat looked back up at me for a moment and then rushed forward and crawled underneath. I just managed to reach the door myself and the door opened on its own. The rat was sitting patiently on the other side. Slowly, I poked my head out the door and I looked down the hall. Checking first to my right, then my left. Empty. The hall was completely empty. I breathed a sigh of relief. And then my candle went out. I didn't panic when my candle went out. Honestly, I was getting used to it. And lighting it again wasn't hard. The practice I'd been getting since the game started had made it easier. One scratch, and I had a lit match. The rat watched as I lit the candle with practice that was almost human. When I finished, its nose twitched. It resumed scurrying down the hallway. So I followed it without further ado, closing the door behind me as I did. It was odd, following that rat. There seemed to be some kind of purpose to its movements, like it was following the steps of a plan. Each step they took was done with confidence that I felt ashamed to envy. The green sunlight from outside seemed to have taken on a darker tone, like it was decaying. When I passed by the window, I glanced outside. The entire world was still gray, barren, lifeless. There was a buzz on my phone, and I pulled it out of my pocket. It was from Josie. "Larry, where are you? I've lost Benny. You were right, something's wrong with Greg, and there are these rats everywhere. I've never seen rats this big before." I replied immediately. "Look, I think the rats are on our side, okay? So just, I don't know how to say it, but don't be scared of them." A new message. It was from Benny. "Josie, Larry, thank God you're okay. I'm following one of the rats right now. Do you guys know what time it is?" I looked at the top of my phone. It was... What the hell? "I can't tell." Josie's text sent a shiver down my spine. It was the exact same way I felt. A scream came down the hallway. I jumped, nearly dropping my candle as I spun around. Another text message. "Did you guys hear that?" "Yeah," I answered. "What was that?" "Don't you mean who was that?" I paused again, realizing I didn't know if it was Josie or Benny that I was talking with. My thumb hovered over the buttons, unable to even flinch. Another text appeared. Who is this?" That text came from Josie. The next one answered her question. "Greg." My tongue became a lump in my mouth. My mouth went dry. There was another inhuman scream, then a thundering of footsteps. "Greg's coming, guys." That text didn't come from either Benny or Josie. A tug at my pant leg made me look down. The rat was staring up at me, agitated, then turned to stare at the end of the hallway. I followed its gaze. From down the end of the hallway came the cracking of glass, and a husky voice called my name. The rat immediately took off in the opposite direction. I didn't need any more prodding to follow. When a door opened seemingly by itself, I ducked into it after the rat. I nearly slammed the door shut, but it closed before I could even get my hand on the rusty knob. I knew damn well whoever it was would be able to find me, so I needed to barricade the door shut. Somehow. I began frantically looking around for either a chair or something else to use to prop against the door. The rat's chirp caught my attention. It was standing on an operating table. Without hesitation, I began to push it against the door, upending it so that the wheels weren't on the ground as the top was shoved against the door. The rat chirped again. It was pushing itself against an old wheelchair, which I immediately pushed up to support the operating table. And then I ducked down, making sure my head was out of sight of the door's single rectangular window. Footsteps came shuffling down the hallway. I held my breath and clenched my fist around the candle, turning it so as little light would shine outside the glass as possible. The footsteps were light. Even as they came closer to the door, I glanced over at the rat, whose body rose and fell in quick succession. He was watching the door, same as me. The footsteps stopped. A shadow blocked the sunlight coming in from outside. I could hear breathing. Who was it? Carlton? Greg? The voice that spoke was so hollow, so empty, of even cadence I couldn't tell, save that it had once been human. Larry? Do you want to know where we are? I clamped my lips shut, hand over my mouth and nose. My heart was hammering in my chest. The voice continued speaking. We never left Earth. My heart skipped a beat. We're still on our planet. The voice continued. We're just seeing it as it really is, as it will always be. This is what it looks like beneath our notice. Human eyes have never been able to notice it. They're always so blind to what reality is, unable to see beyond their own arrogance. This is what it is like to live as a rat. see the world for what it is. The doorknob rattled and slowly began to turn until it unlatched. The door shook as something banged against it. The makeshift barricade rattled under the blow. Another bang, and another, and another. The barricade shook under the assault, seeming to struggle under the strain. "Open the door, Larry," the voice said. "Let me in." I closed my eyes. The voice kept speaking. "Let me in, Larry. Just open the door and let me in. Open the door." Then, in the distance, came a scream. A girl's scream. Oh God, it couldn't be her. Not her. And just like that, the door stopped shaking. Footsteps began to shuffle away, but the voice kept speaking. "Midnight game will end soon. Very soon. It'll all be over soon. It'll all be over." I waited until the voice had completely vanished before daring to move. The rat scrambled out from my grasp and up into the barricade, looking down at me. It was harder to remove the barricade than it had been to make it. By the time I opened the door, I couldn't help but notice how the sunlight had changed again. Now its shade was less sickly, yet still the color of a corpse. I was already beginning to follow the rat when there was a rumble under my feet, like an earthquake. Then a distant echo like the rattling of chains. "What's going on?" I mumbled. They stopped, realizing what I'd done. The rat turned around and stared at me with wide black eyes. I'd just broken a rule, hadn't I? I thought I'd hear a voice by my ear saying that I was the third player to lose the midnight game. I'd feel its hands grab onto my shoulders and drag me away into the darkness. I'd end up like Carlton and Greg. Nothing of the sort happened. I pulled up my phone about to text the others when someone else beat me to it. Not long now. There was a distant rumble behind me, and my phone screen suddenly turned to static, a rainbow of colors flashing across the screen. I tried to turn it off, but no matter how hard I held my fingers onto the off button, it stayed on. I gritted my teeth together and I stuffed my phone back in my pocket before looking at the rat. The rat suddenly raised his head high in the air and let out a high-pitched squeak. For a brief moment, everything was still. Then the walls bulged. Plaster burst open as a swarm of rats flooded out and crawled onto the floor, assembling behind the one I'd been trusting as my guide. They all stood to attention, staring at me. Then the guide squealed again, and the rats moved. They grabbed onto each other's tails with their mouths, squirming into shapes on the ground. My eyes widened when they stopped. The rats had formed themselves into words, actual words that I could read. "The midnight game is ending," they said. Each rat save the guide remained perfectly still as my eyes darted across them. "What lies beneath is almost awake. Only 2 players remain now. The other team is coming for you." The rats let go of their tails and shifted into new letters, making a new sentence. "Only one needs to survive to win the midnight game. Try to find somewhere to hide until the game ends." I felt my eyes widen at the rats. I shook my head grimly. The rats shifted again, my guide remaining still, expression unchanged. "Your friends can be regained if you only survive. The King of Terrors does play fair." I blinked, squinting in confusion. Then I heard the 5th voice speak. It came from behind me, far away but undeniably close.
"Ah, there you are. I wonder, have the rats told you my title yet?"
There was a footstep behind me. I slowly turned around. In the green sunlight, the shadows had again converged together. The shape they made was nearly identical to the one I'd seen before, but it was taller, thinner, and more regal in how it held itself.
"The game is ending,"
the 5th voice said. The shadow at the end of the hallway moved, one foot rising off the ground as it moved forward. The other foot followed. The shadow was walking.
"I have to set up my game now. Otherwise, I can hardly call myself the king, can I?"
I turned around. The other rats had vanished. Only my guide remained. He was already darting forward and onto the leg when something grabbed my shoulders.
"I admit,"
the king said,
I am impressed by your resilience. For a player your age, you handle yourself admirably. Your self-control is a challenge I've yearned for. Please, when you do end up screaming in fear, know that I shall not take much satisfaction in losing a worthy opponent. I was pulled back suddenly, and everything went black. When I opened my eyes, it was to complete darkness. Then a pinprick of light appeared. A sickly green, purple, magenta, so many colors. Colors I couldn't even begin to name, all swarming around me. My eyes widened. They burned under the glare of the colors. From the vast cascade of colors, a shape took form. An eye. Then something scrambled onto my face, tiny feet gripping into my skin as a hairless tail dangled over my cheek. The fur of the rat pressed against my face, blocking my vision. I could feel its hot breath against my ear, my guide's whiskers twitching in terror that I shared. Something roared, a distant, echoing, unearthly roar. So far it seemed to be coming from the edge of the universe itself. Chains rattled as more roars joined in. Roars I couldn't even begin to describe. I've never heard of something like them. They were almost singing. Like they were one massive chorus, all joining into one symphony human ears should never hear. I could feel it ringing in my ears and something wet beginning to drip out of it. My body shook and rattled. A vast wind washed over me, pushing me back, fluctuating from freezing to scalding. In a fraction of a second, the rat began to scream. Something grabbed my hand. I landed on my back. The wind was gone. So were the colors. As I blinked, I could see the underside of the rat. It was moving. As I slowly pulled it off my face, I found myself looking up at a ceiling, bathed in sunlight, the color of a corpse's skin. A shadow appeared above me. You survived, the voice of the kind murmured. I'm impressed. You're most lucky to have a rat with you. But the midnight game isn't over yet, Larry. We're in the last 10 minutes. The king chuckled. This is always when it gets the most fun. Something dropped into my chest. I grabbed it. I held it up to my face. It was a plump orange candle. Light it, the king said. And your own. In all the centuries I've lived, I've learned of a little thing which you humans fear. I'm going to come at you with every ounce of fear I can muster, so please, light your candles. And don't disappoint me. The king chuckled. I could hear something. No, several people shuffling nearby. After all, the king said softly, you're the last player for your team. Last player. I was the only one left. I was the only chance at winning. I only had 10 minutes. I didn't light the other candle, just my own. And having to keep track of 2 lit candles in both hands, that was a hindrance, not an advantage. The soft chuckle of the king was undoubtedly impressed. Sacrificing an advantage that would prove an obstacle for a more secure position, they mused. I thought you would see through that trick. Wait. If he knew I would see through it, he must have some other kind of backup plan. I was already scrambling to my feet, candle gripped tightly in my hands when my friends began to move forward. Where'd the rat go? It wasn't beside me anymore. I was frantically looking around for my friend who'd helped me nearly the whole game when I saw Josie's face. White hair, gaunt cheeks, pale skin, eyes sunken into her head. She was smiling so wide her skin seemed to crack. Benny was beside her. The only difference was that his skin was a slightly brighter shade. Greg and Carlton were on the other side of the two, smiling right at me so wide their cheeks cracked. I nearly screamed, but my mouth remained clamped shut. I held the candle out in front of me as a meager kind of protection. My friends stopped in their tracks, all smiling at me with wide eyes. Their eyelids didn't even twitch. Something brushed past my neck, slowly, tenderly trailing across the nape of it. Warm air whooshed over my ears, and the hard tendrils slowly wrapped around my shoulders. Let me show you, the king whispered. What it is to be afraid. I shut my eyes tight. And then I heard my friends giggling with husky voices and the slow shuffling of their footsteps. When my eyelids snapped open, Josie's face was inches from the candle. I stumbled back, nearly falling over. I thought I was going to collide with the thing behind me, but I didn't. I kept walking back away from my friends until I hit the wall. Where the hell was that rat? My friend stopped. Sickly green light began gently descending onto them. I looked up to see holes in the ceiling. The sky was plainly visible, and so was the green sun that floated across it. It filled the entire sky, growing brighter and brighter with every passing second. I could see the cells of it pulsing like a heart, and slowly, the sun began to shrink, seeming to pull into itself. Then in a blinding flash of light, it expanded. I covered my eyes, trying to block it. I learned recently it takes 7 minutes for light to reach the earth from the sun. That knowledge made me think that I was about to die. And I realized I should already be dead. I looked back up. The sun hadn't changed. A poor trick, the king purred. I admit, of course, one day, the sun you humans orbit will die and consume your world. Will it be today? Tomorrow? In your grandson's lives? Who knows? Does that keep you up at night? Sometimes it did. But I couldn't say a word. A shuffling in front of me got my attention. My friends were moving again. I kept holding out the candle, keeping them at bay. And then it went out. In a few seconds, I'd be able to relight it, but I couldn't take my eyes off my friends. Benny began to break off from the group, moving to the side. I kept my back against the wall as I moved away, then paused. Greg and Carlton were slowly shuffling to cut me off. I glanced from one to the other, Josie, Carlton, Greg, Benny, all staring at me with smiles and unblinking eyes, trying to formulate a plan. Then something occurred to me. None of them had laid a hand on me. Well, they had ample opportunity to do so, but they didn't take the chance. Why didn't they? Unless the king only needed me to scream to give in. He didn't need to harm me, and harming me to get a scream out of me would be cheating. It wouldn't count as real fear, would it? I took a step forward slowly. My friends backed away. I took another step, so did they. Slowly, I kept walking until the plump orange candle was at my feet again. I bent down and picked it up, lit it with the other candle, and then set it at my feet. My friends were still smiling at me without even blinking, surrounding me. But my fear of them had not evaporated, but lessened. You've caught on? The king whispered. You've caught on to the secret. Very astute. How odd that one so young should be so astute, so cunning, with such self-control and resilience as you. Why? I tensed. Why would you have such talent? Were you born with it, or? The king let out a quiet hum. Was it nurtured? I spun around, eyes darting from one smiling, gaunt face to another. Who nurtured your talents? The king whispered. Did they mean to? Was it your parents? My hair began to stand on end. The king seemed to press their advantage. Do you love your parents? Do they? Do they know you're here? Know you're playing the midnight game? I bit my bottom lip. Hard. A small trickle of blood ran down my chin. Tut, tut, the king said, not teasingly. You shouldn't hurt yourself like that. The next time he spoke, it was right next to my ear. Have you ever wanted to kill a man? My breath hitched in my throat as I inhaled sharply through my nostrils. Does that frighten you? I couldn't answer. The king hummed again. I see. I see. That is your fear. Someone as young as you shouldn't have such desires, and that frightens you. He was gentle as he spoke. In your heart, you imagine finding the people who hurt you, taking their lives with your own hands. In your heart lies a darkness rarely found in such a young heart. The king paused. Then I heard his voice silently whisper. Another responded, I see, I see. A single instance, the entire room became silent, like when the midnight game had started, when I couldn't even hear myself breathe or the beating of my heart. Laughter. Laughter began filling the room. A sick, twisted, mocking laughter. The laughter was identical to mine. I felt something slide across my shoulders, but my hairs didn't sit on edge. I was already covered in goosebumps. It's odd. While I was terrified when the game started, having spent nearly an entire hour afraid, I didn't feel like screaming anymore. I felt almost numb to fear. Ah, the king said. Time is passing quickly, but this was inevitable. Soon enough, an empty threat of fear stops being effective, leaving one recourse. Something grabbed my shoulders, and I turned instinctively, expecting to see nothing. I didn't. I only saw gnarled knuckles and fingers ending in black nails, curved like claws. Feel the fear. I was pulled backwards and tossed across the ground with ease, my candle falling from my hands and landing on the ground. It went on instantly. I blinked in shock at what I saw standing above me. It was a gray, malformed person with lips that were cracked in several places, revealing twisted teeth that pushed through them, rows of them growing out of the gums between the lips, while two gleaming eyes, both the color I couldn't possibly name, stared down at me. This was the King of Terrors, wasn't it? I was only looking at his head, but that was all it took for whatever courage I had mustered to begin leaving me. And now, the king said softly, bending into a crouch. My friends were behind him, mimicking his movements with uncanny precision. I saw something in their empty eyes. The same thing that I could see in the king's eyes. That same little gleam. His lips didn't move as he spoke. The game ends. His gaze locked on mine. I could feel invisible strings linking us together like worms. They slinched through my eyelids and into my head. A scream began to rise in my throat. It was at that moment. The rat came back. The first thing I heard was their shrill chirp, then an enraged howl before there was an immense thundering, then a set of doors, which I hadn't noticed in my haste, burst open, and a man with a ghastly beard burst through, rushing towards the group in front of me. I saw something black rush past his feet as he barreled into Greg and Josie. The king spun around for a moment, then vanished. So close, he mused. So close. That was when Greg's alarm went off. I can't explain what happened next. Only that when the asylum began to shake, the walls fell away. Not the walls of the building, more like the pieces of the world around me. Down to their very atom. It began to fall away, like wet mud sliding off a window. What was revealed was a vast, seething mass of... The closest thing I compared to was maggot. But that's not right either. Whatever it was sleeping, and it was just on the edge of my vision. I barely noticed it at all. And then a set of small feet crawled up my arm and onto my face, blocking my vision again. When the rat got off my face, my friends and I, we were back in the cell where it all started. They were all passed out, cold, leaving me the only one to see. Their candles had all melted down to the bottom. I had to wait until they woke up before we left, and none of them had any memory of the midnight game or what happened after the candles went out the first time. None of them asked me what happened either. And I can't bring myself to tell them. As we left, I couldn't help glancing over my shoulder every now and then. Graffiti left by other visitors served as a reminder that we weren't the first to come here or to leave. I wondered about that howling man who had somehow been with us during the game. Not entirely sure if I imagined it all. Sometimes at night, I lie awake, too afraid to sleep. I have something else to keep me up now. Along with the thoughts that my dad would come into my bed again, even though he's rotting in a cell somewhere. I learned how to stop myself screaming, if only to make sure that he didn't enjoy it as much. I never thought that would help me with something like that. As we left the asylum, I considered how I felt about Josie, and honestly, I couldn't see anything happening between us. I mean, we were young. We were better as friends. And that's how we've stayed since then. Even though my friends don't remember what happened when we played the midnight game, it felt like it drew us together somehow, made our bond stronger. I couldn't have been the only one to notice it. But they never said anything. Sometimes when I see a rat, it'll lock its gaze with mine and it'll just stay there, staring at me. But not one has ever winked.
Hey there kids, it's me, Mr. Creepypasta, and I wanted to tell you thank you for watching or listening to tonight's video or tonight's episode of the podcast. Please subscribe on YouTube if you'd like to get more videos from me, or subscribe on Spotify if you'd like to get more podcasts from me. Or if you just like listening to me in general, you can always check out audible.com. On audible.com, I've got a bunch of different audiobooks that I've worked with for these authors that you may see across the channel. Some of my personal favorites I've worked on are the ones from Vincent Venicava, as well as the ones from Gas Station Jack or Jack Townsend. You can find all those audiobooks from Vincent, as well as Tales from the Gas Station, Volume 1 and Volume 2, available on audible.com. And now, for patreon.com/Mr. Creepypasta, which you can always find in a link in the description, I want to give you all a very big thanks. There's many of you down there in the descriptions who I give big thanks to, and everybody also at this tier, like Dr. Strawberry, Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Ken Lando Higuchi, Brianna Ventine Jensen, Champinski, The Red Oak Shield Virus, Sandy Barney, G. Weevil 3, Diana Kraus, Stephen Van Huss, Tristan Pelton, Nico Kao, The Ginger Bros, Dante Rao, Rafael Rodriguez, Last Blade Song, Don Mulemeister, Eliminator 86, Nebsky, Steampunk Sinner, Optimistic Avocado, Caleb Dougal, Daniel Polson, Finley, and Sky Harbor. You guys are the MVPs, and you guys keep the channel running, and I honestly cannot thank you enough for all that you do. That's all for tonight, guys. Sweet dreams.